Right, so this topic says, go on, call me Ishmael if you like, I'm the man. How does Ishmael change and develop throughout the course of the novel to find self-acceptance? So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to highlight the key words and phrases that stand out in this topic. So how does, so we're talking about Ishmael change and develop throughout the course of the novel to find self-acceptance. So what is this topic actually asking us to discuss? Well, in the first instance, I think it's fair to say that, and we're going to break this down, that, here we go, that we need to explore what aspects of Ishmael's personality and perceptions change. Space there. Another idea or issue that comes to mind is what causes these changes, and finally, how do these changes show that he has found self-acceptance. How do these changes show that he has found self-acceptance? Now, the thing about it is that we know Ishmael doesn't really accept himself or doesn't really believe in his own individuality and uniqueness and, just being different and just having any confidence in himself, because we know that he doesn't like his name, for instance, and he thinks he has, Ishmael syndrome. He doesn't really have any friends at the start of the novel. Keep in mind that he spends most of it trying to hide from Barry Bagsley and that, so his confidence is also very low, because he doesn't really think much of himself. He thinks he's an idiot. He thinks he's not smart. He thinks that, he's not even worth, in fact, he thinks that he can't even get Kelly Faulkner because she would never ever look at somebody like him. And all of this changes by the end of the novel. Now, it begs the question, I think the big question here is what causes these changes? And the one common denominator, or the one common factor that I've found in speaking to some of you in class, as well as, thinking about it later on, is that once Ishmael makes friends with the group of boys that he makes friends with, his self-perceptions, or his personality and his perceptions, or what he thinks about himself, start to change. He starts to believe in himself a little bit. He faces his fears. He accepts that being different or unique or having a unique name is actually not such a bad thing. He even gains confidence enough to stand up for himself and his friends, in dealing with Barry. Right? So all these changes happen as a result of the friendships that he makes. So to break this down even further, I've put together a table that I ordinarily would in class, which you will have seen before, and I've broken it down like this. Now, just a little disclaimer, this is one way to interpret this topic and respond to it. You don't have to respond to it in this way. If you've got a better idea and better approach, or some other way that makes sense to you, by all means go for it. This is just a suggestion. So, what you could do is for your topic sentence, you could outline which aspect of Ishmael's perceptions or personality changes and what causes the change. Then you would launch into your discussion about that. So what Ishmael was like at the beginning of the text, with obviously, evidence and, this is where your evidence and explanation goes. So this is example number 1. Then for example number 2, or the second part of your explanation or discussion in the teal paragraph, the change that has occurred and what has caused it. And finally, what's the author suggesting about achieving self-acceptance and what it sometimes takes. So this is where you talk about what Michael Bauer is suggesting to us. So as an example, one aspect of Ishmael's personality or perceptions that change and prove to us that he's actually found self-acceptance is that he learns to face his fears, specifically of public speaking, and this happens as a result of his friendship with Scobie. So I'm going to say here, Ishmael's friendship with Scobie is what helps him face his fears of public speaking, or face his fears. I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah, face his fears. Okay, so in the beginning of the text, we know that he is deathly afraid of public speaking. He also he thinks that he is stupid, right? He doesn't believe that he can actually do it. What ends up changing is that he voluntarily speaks in public and isn't even nervous about it. This happens as a result of Scobie's encouragement along the way. And I guess even his push to, I mean, he doesn't manipulate Ishmael, but he certainly prompts him to speak publicly. Remember when, I think it was Bill, had laryngitis, which is kind of what I've got at the moment, funnily enough. When Bill ends up with laryngitis and he has trouble speaking, or he can't actually use his voice because, it's gone, Scobie kind of puts Ishmael in a tricky position where he says, well, if you don't help us out, we don't actually make it. So, it was a sort of tough encouragement, but it certainly did push Ishmael over the edge, and he stood up and he tried. He did have a bit of a fumble along the way, but, he definitely faced his fears. So Scobie's encouragement along the way and his tough lessons, I guess, show Ishmael that he is in fact clever and can face his fears. So what's the author suggesting about this self-acceptance? Well, self-acceptance here comes in the way of him, facing his fears, and being, I guess, thinking or agreeing that he's smart enough to do so. So, again, what's Michael Bauer suggesting? Well, I think that with the right help and encouragement from friends, an individual, I'll say Ishmael, is able to face his fears of public speaking and no longer thinks of himself as lacking. I don't say stupid. There it is. Right. Now, what's another aspect of Ishmael's perception or personality that changes? So he ends up seeing that I guess one of the biggest changes actually is that he accepts that being unique is not necessarily a bad thing. And who do we directly link to that, or which minor character? I'd say Kelly Faulkner. So Kelly Faulkner's interest in Ishmael provokes him to consider that being unique is not, in fact, a bad thing. Right, so we know that at the start of the text, one of the things that makes him unique is his name. So he hates his name and everything that goes with it. So the story of Moby Dick, and every time somebody says, "Oh, that's a really unique name," he hates it. He thinks that there's a reference to Ishmael Lasser's syndrome, so he thinks that every time somebody hears his name or comes into contact with it, they have a bad reaction to him. Right? That's just his self-esteem and his self-acceptance. Not really peaking, I guess. It's quite low there. So the change that has occurred, well, when Ishmael finds out that Kelly Faulkner is in fact interested in him, they have a conversation about his name and her name, and she kind of points out to him that his name is in fact cool, and it takes somebody else's belief in him to make him realize that he's actually pretty cool. So Kelly's interest in Ishmael and her likes for his unusual name makes him reconsider what he hates about his name and himself. Right? What's the author suggesting about this self-acceptance here? Well, I think that sometimes it takes another person to make us realize that we're actually, that it's cool to be different. Sometimes it takes a stranger to point out that our differences make, I'll phrase it so that it's more specific to Ishmael. So in Ishmael's instance, it took a stranger, it takes a stranger to convince Ishmael that his name and let's say his unusual name and quirky personality are actually likable and not as disastrous as he thinks originally. And sometimes strangers can make us see the best of ourselves. Right? That said, I've given you a couple of examples of how you can go about planning for the changes that happen, or rather exploring the changes and developments that Ishmael undertakes and finds, in the way that he finds self-acceptance. You can talk about his courage in standing up to Barry Bagsley as well, and some of his other fears, and you can talk about the friendships that he also makes and how he becomes more comfortable as an individual. You can, discuss even, I guess, his lack of fear towards the end and facing Barry and saying, that's okay, I'm going to be here next year. So he's ready for it. He's grown as a person. So that's the sort of thing you need to sort of discuss. I'll leave it up to you. You don't necessarily have to go with these arguments, but hopefully this has helped you to break down the topic.